Start. Okay. Okay, everyone. Hope you are doing well. So let's start with the talk. So before we start, we would like to give you some of the parts like the current affairs that are just ongoing. The sessions that you do see, that the imagination that you used to have, that you can track some vessel out there just by having your phone, okay? From the comfort of your home or even by sitting on the chairs right now. This was something that we used to see in the movies or some shows like Mr. Robot, but it's today's reality. And with that, we would like to welcome to our talk, which is Dead in the Water, Tracking Ships through VSAT when AIS goes dark. But as we do speak, we would like to give some disclaimers. So as they say that with great powers come great responsibility. So it's disclaimer one, that the content discussed on this platform is meant for educational purposes only. So the misuse of any information provided herein shall be the sole liability of the abuser. And the second disclaimer is this talk bears no authorization from speakers' employees. However, moving forward, we have our agenda.
Uh, Hello everyone. So before we delve into the technicalities and the part of the talk, let's clear a basics of the agenda that we are going to hear. So this talk is about the OSINT, the passive way of tracking things, the passive way of doing things, because the things that we are dealing with are quite sensitive. So we're trying to understand that how to do and track the things. So how we're going to walk through is that we're going to talk about the AIS, how AIS has been used for conventional tracking. We're going to talk about the limitations of the AIS. We're going to talk about the dark ships, ghost ships, and then the part of the VSAT comes in, how the exposed terminals can be helpful to track your ships down, then about the satellite imagery that is helpful for the ocean perspective on the GEOINT, and then we have some good case studies. So we have been doing this for the past 5 years, and that brings us to a small talk about who am I. So I'm Sagar Tiwari. I'm an independent cybersecurity and ocean researcher. For the past 5 to 6 years, I've been doing this work. So I'm working as a content creator, writer, anything that makes me curious, anything that excites me, I do. So I work with multiple firms across my work like Maltigo, Artistic Cloud, Threadpost. I've been written over 250 articles about cybersecurity and ocean in different perspectives. And with this Shubham, I have shared stage about 30 conferences at Sans Ocean Summit, Hacktivity, multiple chapters in besides chapters, CSX in India. So yeah, we have been doing that. Over to you, Shubham.
So I'm Shubham Kumar, currently employed as a senior security analyst. Besides Sagar, I'm also an OSINT enthusiast, and we have been doing this work since last 5 to 6 years. And we are cybersecurity evangelists, and we will not go there much, but we'll start with the very part that what is maritime ocean? We do understand that all of the people out here are more of the experts, right? We do have a lot of experts that are working on the reverse engineering, okay, malware analysis, threat intelligence, but we want to give a different touch out here. We want to give a different space, and that is maritime. Why we are discussing this right now? Because of the very part that almost 90% of the global supply chain goes through oceans and waters. And well, we will just describe you in a minute the importance of it and what maritime OSINT is. It's a part of OSINT, right? Where we collect, analyze, and disseminate the information through the waterways itself. This can include ships, this can include fleets, that can include the ocean waters out there, the traveling zones, everything that you can imagine. So it synthesizes different data streams ranging from AIS to your satellites to your RF signals and also the global records for people. Now, the point that I was saying, why? Okay? The point is that almost as we said, that 90% of the global supply chain goes through water. We have the 70% of the water around our Earth itself. And you would have recognized some of these news articles too. That the Hormuz war summary for mariners, right? There was a very choke point that happened. Almost 20% of the global waterways rule through this, and it was a chaos that is happening continuously as you are seeing. Other than that is that the product, there are a number of hijackings that do happen through these crude oil tankers or even these ships that travel through the routes. That is where maritime oceans comes into a great play because it helps you to understand what is the status of the things that are going through the parts and eventually help them to protect it. Now, moving forward, we will go to the very basic part of it, that what is AIS? AIS refers to Automatic Identification System. It's basically works on a VHF band around the frequencies of 161.975 megahertz and 162.025 megahertz. Why these frequencies are necessary? Because you need to tune it to these particular frequencies in order to see what is out there. The other part is it broadcasts your information. It's more of a transponder. Every single 2 minutes, it just sends out the signals out to the people that I'm here. And what you can do further, you can get the location, the coordinates, the global records of the things, utilizing the power of AIS. And that is where the conventional method is utilized in order to track them. So there are some of the commercial AIS platforms that you guys can actually utilize in order to see these and track these fleets of vessels. First is your vessel finder, marine vessel traffic, and marine traffic. All of these platforms have some of these other capabilities. For example, vessel finders provide a comprehensive global coverage with a historical tracking of the ships, like where it went, okay? If it went to a particular continent X and continent Y, then where it went, right? But there is some limitations because there is a limited coverage in the ocean region. We will come to the point further. Other part is the marine vessel traffic. It does provides you a real global time coverage and it's very comprehensive too. Just like marine traffic, just take a look at that. It provides a comprehensive port intelligence tool which you can utilize in your frameworks when you are doing global security operations and threat analysis. But there is a very big limitation because the data that you are getting are more of the restricted format. So what are you going to do if you want to track something which actually goes dark? And there is the part of AIS limitation, the dark ship and the ghost ships. If you have been following the current news around you, you would have heard this word 110% out there, that there are numerous dark ships or ghost ship fleets out there. What are these? So, as I said, that AIS is more of a transponder. So there are two AIS receivers, one who is sending the information and the collector, basically, who is receiving that information, right? So one sends the information, one receives the information. There needs to be a particular distance between the two. And it is almost 20 to 30 nautical miles. What if this distance increases? Then there is a gap that forms. Now you can't see the fleet that you were tracking. Other part is that there is another part which says satellite AIS. But there is a condition. A lot of these ships actually turn off their AIS when they are moving through the waterways. This can be through various other parts. For example, they are going through a region where a lot of piracy is happening, and they can turn it off, right? And that is the part of the dark and the ghost ships, because these ships are of very interest, as always, and have been a lot more seen during the Strait of Hormuz incident. A lot of these ships were passing. And how you can actually track this, we will come to the next part.
So we understood the basics of what AIS and how AIS generally work. So we also know about the limitations that it possesses. Now there has come a very interesting stuff and very peculiar in this part, and that is the VSAT. So basically VSAT stands for Very Small Aperture Terminals. So basically these are the satellite dome-based devices that are being placed on the ships. And when they are placed on the ships, they are being geo-locked with the satellites to provide the reliable form of communication. Now, why reliable form of communication? Is because they need something with the people, the sailors on the boats and ships need to communicate back to their home bases, back to the land bases, maybe to send the telemetric data, weather updates, or different kinds of information they need to tell. So for that, they need a reliable form of internet connection, and they need to be continuously in connect. Okay, so in the VSAT, we have basically two visible parts, that is the dome or the antenna, and then we have the indoor equipment like the modem routers that is provide the internet. So we can understand it like the VSAT is like when we have a router on the wall that is connected to the internet. In this case, it is basically something that is connected to the internet via the satellite connections. So that's the important part of the VSAT. And how it basically works is that through the diagram we can see that they send uplink signals to the satellite, then satellite just transmit those signals to the ground stations connected to the internet, and all the queries that are being happening, they just tell. So that's the entirety work about how VSAT basically works upon. Now, before we moving on to the understanding more, let's talk about some of the basic terminologies here. So, VSATs are majorly linked to the geostationary satellite that is about the 36,000 kilometers above the spot to Earth, because they need to be continuously geologged, because they want to transmit the signal continuously without a break, because that is important for the operations. Apart from that, they need to have the stabilized antenna. So the dish automatically adjusts to the wherever the ship is going. So it's like they are being geolocked. So maybe the ship's continuously moving. There are times when the ships are being moving up and down. So they need a stabilized antenna controller so that the satellite can be continuously linked. The antennas can be continuously locked into those satellites point. And there are different frequencies where the frequencies, their signals are happening, like the KU band, KA band, or the C band. So depending upon the use cases, from 10 gigahertz to 17, 18 gigahertz, the differences in the frequencies of the signals, these signals are being logged through that. Then we have the latencies, like because the signals is traveling so far up, so there's going to be the latency. So it sometimes happens that the data does not update very frequently. And apart from that, we have the BUC and the LNB that helps to uplink the signal or maybe reduce any noise that is being happening, because there is lots of stuff when these signals are being going up and down. Now there are major vendors in the VSAT community that is being providing lots of VSAT devices. So like there are the Intellian Technologies, the Cobham Satcoms that has the Sailor series of 600 to 250, 900, 500 different kinds of series. Apart from that, there are KVH Industries, ST Engineering, iDirect, Orbit Communication, CTEL, Comtech, EF Data, Marklink, Speedcast, or Inmarsat. So basically, these are the different vendors that provides you the different kinds of VSAT devices depending upon their functionalities, depending upon the things. They do provide the form of communication. Now, let's talk about like what happens is that they are not conventionally based from the security perspective. And that's where this enumeration part comes. So like, once again, we have to think about like why we're talking about the VSAT here. Because when the AIS signal goes dark, there is a possibility that we cannot get the live coordinates. So the topic here is that to understand that we need to know, is there a way to track the ships apart from those AIS coordinates that are being broadcasting. It's being broadcasting in the open air. Anybody who has the decoders or the right set of antennas set up, they can listen to those signals and decode them. But as Shubham mentioned, that if the ship has been gone away from the far distance of where the signals can be traveled, you cannot track those signals down, hence you cannot have the geo coordinate. So that's where we try to understand that is there any other way of tracking those, and that's where the part of enumerating techniques comes. So the very first thing is to look at the ACU units, or better known as the antenna control units. So basically what they do is that these are the control units that is below the mounted antenna systems, and it controls the antenna's movement. So wherever the satellite is being moving, wherever the ship is being moving, they control the antenna movement there. So if you are looking at what it provides is that it provides a stabilized antenna control, azimuth, elevation, tracking, satellite lock, gyroscopic handling, and the skew angle. So you can see that there are lots of functionalities in the ACU unit that helps to motorize the control part. Now when we search about these units using the internet connected search engines, maybe the census, maybe the MODAT queries you're using, or FOFA search engines, you can figure out that there are some parts that are being visible over the internet using like the service HTTP response body. You can put in and you can query those to the databases, and you can find lots of interesting stuff there. Apart from that, we can look at the service HTTP response body and see some of the identifiers name. So we can know that there is a direct link, maybe a direct link that is available, or maybe sometime in some cases there is not a direct link that can lead you to get those dashboards. Apart from that, you can look at for some of the ports that are very much interesting, that is the 8090, 8080 and 10,000 port where the service might be running. Now the important thing to note that these things, as I told that not meant for traditional conventional way of security. So there are lots of things that they are being exposed like without any authentication wall. So you're always looking from the side of the passive OSINT. Okay, yeah. The another enumerating technique about from the ACU units, we are talking about the open AMIP protocol. So basically, it's an open antenna modem interface protocol. So it's sit between your VSAT device and the modem device. So what it does is it basically a text-based ASCII protocol that tells the communication between the VSAT and modem. It tells what data is being transmitting, where to head, where to put in the head station or skew angle, and switching the beam. So that is what OpenAMP does. So in itself, OpenAMP is not tell you lots of data, but when you are working from the perspective of an OSINT researcher, OSINT analyst, you have some few key points of data available. You need to figure out a link between them, and that's where the OpenAMP enumeration can be quite helpful, because conventionally finding anything from OpenAMP might not be possible. There is slight chances, but not. But what happens that through OpenAMP you can find some ACU units or maybe some other units that are being available. So because they are being connected between the VSAT and the modem itself. So like that, we have the one of the ports that you can look at through for enumeration would be 2002, 2003, 5000, 4001. So these are not the only ports where these things work, but they are like one of the configuration parts of the ports that majorly we have been seeing. Apart from that, one of the critical and very much important is the SNMP enumeration, because SNMP not only tells you about, like we have talked about, like we are focusing on the part of where the ship might be heading, and that requires the geo coordinates. So not only SNMP going to tell you that in the real time, but also can tell you about the ship identifiers information that might not be available anywhere else. So by enumerating SNMP, that could be quite helpful to know the ship name, antenna heading, GPS coordinates, as well as the signal strength, log state, and elevation. So these, when you put in these queries, you can quite find lots of database, lots of information that can help you to connect. Individually might not, but when you see a pivot point between them, you can find these VSAT terminals. So next we are going to show you that some of the findings that we've got. So in the top left corner, we have the UGIS BGAN terminal. And as you can see is that in the 3D GPS fix on the left hand side, we have the location coordinates of where this thing has been currently positioned. So there might be a possible chances that maybe the AI is not being broadcasting, or maybe if the AI is being broadcasting, it's in the open sea, there is no terrestrial receiver that is receiving those satellite signals, or maybe the AIS signal. So in that case, we are getting the signal through the satellite itself. So you can see the UGIS BGAN terminal. We have the another one, the middle one is the Italian VSAT terminal that tells you, once again, we can see the coordinates here, and that's the on the rightmost is the Cobham VSAT terminal that we can once again see some of the coordinates. So there are plethora of information that is available when we are enumerating the VSAT, but from the OSINT perspective, we are looking at the passive way of tracking the things, and that's where we only need the coordinates to look into it. But from an attacker perspective, there are lots of things to elaborate upon. Some more dashboard that we found over our research was like the JRC Fleetman. We got, once again, we got the coordinate positions, and in the Intellium, we got another one on the this bottom one. So we have once again see the latitude and longitude positions there. So we can see that these are being updating in the real time. So it's like when you get through, like we have talked about the enumeration part of the ACU enumeration or the OpenAMP enumerations, or maybe some ports that you might be looking at. You can get these services and you can look at the coordinates that are updating in the real time that is happening. So that's one way of seeing and tracking the things, because like in the conventional way, when the AIS is not being working, you can track the ships through the VSAT. Now that takes us to the another part.
Okay, having understood the part that where the VSAT is helping the ships actually. So the ships or the vessels that you are seeing need not just turn off the AIS, maybe they can spoof their own location. That is where understanding about VSATs and even more the satellite intelligence frameworks puts their value in. Because through these satellites, you can actually see a bit of the information that where a ship is. Okay? So it does utilize different types of configurations, we would say. First is your SAR, and other one is your optical imagery. Okay? And how the data is pulled, basically from different satellites that are revolving continuously around the Earth. We are just focusing two of these platforms that you can utilize, a Copernicus one or even a Planet Labs. Initially, it used to be Sentinel Hub, but now it is Planet Labs owned. That is what you can utilize in order to see the ships or the marine vessels that are out there in the ocean. Okay? And why we need to understand this? Because of the very same reason that oceans plays a very critical role. Okay? So we'll first start at the very basic part, and that is Sentinel-2. This Sentinel-2 satellite is basically for optical imagery. It basically your eye in the sky that gives you a satellite view of the vessel that is flowing through a particular ocean. As you can see in the video itself, that it shows a particular ship out there, right? It does have a resolution. Don't expect it to give you a very, very high image. Okay, these very, high resolution images cost a lot. That is from different vendors, whether it be Maxar. It used to be Maxar, but now is Vanter. So these images play a very critical role because it helps you to understand which vessel is out there in particular ocean if it has turned off its AIS or even not being seen through the VSAT part. Okay. So the resolution can be from 10 meters, 20 meters, or 30 meters, but it's enough for you to understand what kind of a vessel it is, whether it be a cruise one, okay, or whether it be a tanker, because these are very big, okay. Now, the particular part where gives an extra edge is SWIR configuration. So whenever you are utilizing these platforms, right, you can see it says true color, false color, NDVI, moisture, SWIR, NDIM, NDSI. These are different configurations that you can play around and see what the more information it gives. For example, SWIR can be utilized. It's basically stand for your shortwave infrared bands. Okay, it helps you to see if a particular satellite ship image that you are getting is actually being attacked on, because if a missile hits on it or something hits on it and it's burning, then it will showcase that information with a red dot, and that you can see on a different configurations. Okay, so I will come to the second part. This is the Sentinel-1. This is actually a very brilliant configuration. Why? Because Sentinel-2 optical imagery has a particular limitation, and that is cloud coverage. If there is a lot of cloud in a particular area, right, then you won't be able to see the particular ship that is down there. But Sentinel-1 basically works on a particular physics methods, and that is SAR imagery. SAR is nothing but synthetic aperture radar functionality, where the satellite basically sends a signal, okay, basically to the ships and itself, and the ships or the particular part, they reflect that back. And this reflection is what helps to identify us what is what. For example, water and the plane surfaces basically can be seen in a very dark part, in the black part. But these ships or these vessels can be seen as bright spots. And whenever they are moving a lot, okay, then these bright spots grow even bigger. For example, there are a very big tanker, then you will see a star version of it, okay? And there are different, like configurations again you can use, and that is like VH or VV. These are vertical and vertical configurations for your own understanding what kind of vessel it is, okay? Now, why this is important? Because these ships, even though if an area has a particular cloudy effect, right, and you can't see the ships beneath it, but Sentinel World basically gives you all the informations, even if there is a very heavy cloud coverage. And do understand this, that these are near real times, okay? You can't expect them, this is basically a 3 hours gap between the information that you are getting. And also it happens that Sentinel-2 basically revolves at a particular point again under a 5 days difference, And Sentinel-1 also gives around a 6 days kind of a difference. Okay, this is the particular information. Now, there is another part which is firms and data fusion, why we are saying. First, I will come to firms. Firms basically refers to fire information for resource management systems. It's basically a NASA firms that you can use. Why this is very important? Because it gives you the burning effect on whole Earth that you can see. Okay, the red spots that you are seeing in the map itself, they are the configuration where fire is currently being seen. Now, if this fire is particular in an ocean, what can it refer to? You already know about it, right? And this is where it helps. And firms is more real time because it use a different, Landsat satellite kind of configuration. It uses Sentinel. It also uses MODIS, right? These are the very part. Now, why satellite is very important to you? Just want to give you a bit of a difference because the vessels that are out there, they never leave a trace, okay? But still, if something is seen on a satellite, it will be there forever. You can just go back to a particular point and you will see, even if the claims are false, as we have seen in our own area. Other part is the eval blueprint. The eval script is basically a JavaScript that you can utilize, okay, and you can basically configure it to see the different formations, and you can match and combine two different formats. Like for example, the data set from Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2, you can combine together and see a different pattern of the things. And that is where the data fusion and the forms play comes in.
So now we have understand about the usage of the VSAT and the geospatial one where we talk about the satellite imagery, the firms or the SAR imagery. So let's look at the case study one that we found. So in this particular part of the ocean, when we were tracking it through the AIS, we were not able to see a ship in that region because it might be happening is that the signals might be bouncing off, there might be some kind of spoofing or jamming that might be happening, or basically blocking out the signals, the AIS signals on 161.975 megahertz or 162.025 megahertz. That's where the AIS basically operates. So that's why we are not able to see anything on the vessel finder or any kind of vessel tracking app. So globally, it was not possible. So when we look at the another Cobham VSAT terminal, we got the geo-logged stationary satellite coordinates, and when we map it to the mapping, we found it here in this part. So this is a way of seeing the things is that when there are no AIS signals, maybe the AIS signals have been gone dark, we can still see the vessels through the satellite logged coordinate positions, and that's one way of tracking it down. Moving on, another case study, and that is quite the important and recent and famous one. So that was happened that there's a ship called Sefin Prestige that was hit in the Strait of Hormuz in the recent time. So what happens is that the ship was in the Strait of Hormuz region, and suddenly when we were tracking and seeing the data through the openly broadcasted AIS information, we found that it was out of range and the position was received on last 23 days. So position was not updating, it was being stationary held, and the news was coming about the strike. So we need to locate and find it out where exactly what's the recent updates that were happening, what were the recent events that are happening. And that's where we thought of using the already described part of the geospatial intelligence or the imagery intelligence. So one we did is that we use the firm's map. So we knew the timelines of the events when it was happening, and at that time we started seeing that is there the last received position, because this was hit, so it was not being sailing and convening like any other ordinary ships. So we knew that the distance would not be that much. So we start mapping like on the which dates we can see those red spots. Those red spots basically define the fire map. So is there any recent fire activity that is being happening and in the open waters? So we mapped it to the last AIS known coordinates, and that's where we started to see is that this was the exact ship that was being hit, and we can track it through the fire that is being coming out of that ship, because that will be detected by the satellite imagery through the firm's map. So by correlating the timeline, by correlating the last known positions, the coordinates, we can create an event that is in a way. That's what I said. Like, when you're doing OSINT, there is not one right source of information that is going to tell you a lot. There are going to be distributed sources of information that you need to pivot, that you need to form chaining events, and that's what's happening. So we moved to another way, that is the Copernicus browser, and we switched to SWR and imagery and trying to see that, because we cannot trust only one sources of the information while conducting. So we go to the another form and let's see the data through that part. And once again, we found the same spot in the same region. So there might be a little bit of, we can say, distinguishes that might be happening, but in a bigger picture, you can find out the event by locating those kinds of information. So yeah, that's the part about us. So I'd like to thank you all. And the ocean tracking represents a powerful tool for gathering, because you need to understand that today's landscape, there are lots and lots of information that is being going on and being moving upon. So when you correlate these kinds of information, when you pivot through one form to the another, you can leverage and analyze the data in a very different perspective. It's not being just related to the ocean, not related to just the SOC and the geoint part. There are lots of maybe the human intelligence layer, maybe the signal intelligence layer, and in this case, the maritime intelligence layer. So that's all in all. And if you want to connect with us, you can scan the website. So yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Tracking ships. We have had a hard time selecting the topics because they submitted two topics. One about ships, another one is about aircrafts.
Yeah.
And we've been like, that meme there, the two red buttons, and like, which one to select?
Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.